You were not my choice." That was her voice, Caroline, breaking the silence in our living room. She stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the view outside. The words cut straight into my chest like a dull, rusted blade, the kind that does more damage coming out than going in. I sat there on the couch, my breath catching in my throat, thinking maybe I'd misheard. The hum of the air conditioner droned on, a low mechanical purr that seemed to underscore the finality of her statement. Our wedding photo was just a few feet away, perched on a side table, a memory of a day when I believed, foolishly, that I was her choice, her only one. I felt a sting in my eyes, but I refused to blink. Men aren't supposed to cry. I'd grown up in Cleveland with a father who hammered that notion into my skull. Stand your ground, never show weakness. But it's funny how those old lessons disappear when it's the love of your life, telling you that you were never truly wanted. It was like standing over the coffin of something precious, a love I'd nurtured, believed in, and placed on a pedestal. Now I was forced to attend its funeral. I tried to say something, anything, but the words got stuck in the back of my throat. Everything in me demanded an answer, a furious shout, or maybe a desperate plea. Instead, I swallowed the bitterness. My fists clenched on my knees, yet I couldn't muster a single retort. Caroline turned slightly, letting me see the tension on her face, the shine of tears in the corners of her hazel eyes. I almost asked if she still loved me. Then I realized that question had become pointless, and just like that, she walked out of the room, leaving me alone with 1,000 thoughts and no desire to voice a single one. I remember when I first suspected something was off. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon at the construction site where I work as a project manager. The sun was beating down on a half-finished framework, and I was double-checking schedules, making sure my crew had all the right materials. My phone chimed with a text, Caroline telling me she'd be late that evening, some philanthropy function. It wasn't unusual for her to attend these events, mingling with donors and city officials. That was her job, a freelance PR consultant who specialized in organizing charity galas and community outreach. Lately, though, she'd been more evasive about these functions, offering vague details or none at all. It was near quitting time when 2 guys from another subcontractor's team walked by, smoking cigarettes. I recognized one, tall, wiry, with a patchy beard. We'd exchanged small talk before. That day, though, he slowed down, looked at me, and gave a grin I didn't like. "Hey, Rogers," he said, taking a puff. "You must have done something right in this life, if you've got a wife like that." I squinted at him. "Sorry." He nodded as though he had some private joke. "Your wife, Caroline, right? She's a looker. My buddy here says he saw her on TV, standing next to that journalist. You know, the one exposing all those shady deals." Got a real cocky grin. The second guy exhaled a lungful of smoke. Derek Vaughn. Recognize his face anywhere. My heart kicked against my ribs. I tried to act casual, but my hand shook a bit. "Yeah, she helps with events sometimes." "So?" The wiry man shrugged. "Nothing. Just word travels. People see them together, all laughing, arms touching. My buddy overheard them at some lounge, cozy in a corner, if you know what I mean." He took another drag. "I was just teasing, Rogers. Don't get all serious. Probably business, right?" I forced a dry smile and nodded. "Sure. Business." They ambled away, still snickering. I stood there, feeling like I'd just taken a sledgehammer to the gut. Caroline had never mentioned Vaughn before, but her hush-hush approach about these events lately hadn't gone unnoticed. We'd been drifting apart, her more absorbed in her clients, me focusing on blueprint after blueprint, our conversations reduced to routine housekeeping. I reminded myself I was a grown man, not some paranoid kid. Maybe there was a logical explanation. That's what I told myself all the way home. Right up until I arrived at our townhouse, only to find Caroline not there. She'd left a note on the kitchen table, Something about an urgent meeting that night. Urgent meeting. That was all. I ate a microwave dinner alone, half-heartedly checking the news to see if anything urgent was happening. Some minor local scandal about a city official. And who was at the forefront of that story? None other than Derek Vaughn, the new hotshot reporter in Washington, D.C. He was younger than me, definitely more stylish, that grin on his face projecting confidence or arrogance, I couldn't decide. But I studied his photo on screen, that chiseled jaw, those lively eyes. Journalists use that grin to charm viewers, to gain trust. No. I shook my head. It's not possible, I told myself, though my gut twisted in quiet dread. Days stretched out like a tightrope. Caroline left early, came home late, feigned sleep when I tried to talk. Finally, I broke. I asked her straight up, "What's really going on, Caroline?" She just gave me a withering look. "It's work," she said firmly. "You should know something about that. You're always at your site too, aren't you?" Any attempt at conversation ended in deflection. And I, in my own corner, grew colder, burying myself in tasks, ignoring the roiling sense that something was tearing us apart. Maybe I hoped ignoring it would make it go away. Then, one night, I made a choice. If she was cheating, I had to see for myself, no matter how humiliating. The next time she said she'd be out at a late function, I followed. She'd left in a silver sedan, one she occasionally borrowed for events. I tailed her, guilt and fear swirling in my stomach. The city lights blurred past, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I tracked her car to a downtown hotel, one with an upscale lounge on the top floor. I parked, heart pounding. In the rearview I could see my own reflection, eyes wide, breath coming too fast. I almost backed out, almost convinced myself I'd misread everything. But my feet found their way to the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected a man on the edge, somewhere between anger and heartbreak. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped onto plush carpet, a whiff of expensive cologne and women's perfume drifting through the corridor. The lounge spread out in front of me, dimly lit with candles and overhead fixtures, all glass windows giving a panoramic view of the city's night skyline. A soft jazz tune played in the background. I scanned the room. And there, in a corner booth away from prying eyes, was Caroline. Across from her sat a man with dark eyes, lean frame, and a swagger even in the way he sipped his drink. Derek Vaughn, in the flesh. She laughed at something he said, leaned forward, touched his wrist. The slightest contact, but intimate. A second later, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, and she let him. The flicker of hunger in his eyes was impossible to mistake. I inched forward, stepping behind a tall potted plant near a decorative column. I barely breathed. My heart hammered like a frightened animal. For a moment, I thought, this is me, Caleb Rogers, reduced to a pathetic snoop, skulking in the shadows just to confirm my wife's loyalty. But it was too late to turn back. I had to know. She leaned closer. Their words reached me in hazy fragments. I've never felt so alive. He doesn't even see me. You're different. She touched his hand again, trailing her fingertips across his knuckles. My stomach lurched. A swirl of shame and rage coiled in me. The jazz music felt like a funeral dirge, mocking everything I'd built with her. Then his hand slid along her thigh, disappearing beneath the smooth fabric of her dress. She wore a short, classy cocktail number in a deep shade of burgundy, something I'd never seen her wear for me. My throat went bone dry. I could see the tremor in her shoulders as she breathed in, see her lips part in a silent gasp. Their gazes locked, heat passing between them, an unmistakable sign of a deeper physical connection. My instincts screamed at me to charge forward, to call them out, to do something. But I was paralyzed. Maybe I was terrified of confirming it was all true. Caroline slid closer, letting Vaughn's hand remain on her thigh. Even in the dim lounge, I recognized the color in her cheeks, the parted lips, the same expression she used to show me. back when our nights were still filled with passion. My mouth went bitter. Everything in me wanted to cry out, to throw something, to break the illusions, and watch them scatter. But instead I turned. I stumbled back to the elevator, my breath ragged, tears burning the corners of my eyes. In that moment, I hated how weak I felt. Men don't cry, I told myself. Yet I was shaking, fists clenched, struggling to stuff down the sob rising in my throat. The elevator door closed on me, reflecting a face I hardly recognized. Pale, eyes glistening. I never confronted them that night. I drove home in a silent daze, the steering wheel slick with sweat from my palms. Once inside the townhouse, I sat on the couch in darkness, letting the hours pass. At 2 a.m, the door opened. Caroline tiptoed in, expecting me to be asleep. She froze when she saw me there, but I didn't say a word. She murmured something, an excuse about an extended dinner meeting. I just stared at her until she couldn't meet my eye. And then, like a man witnessing the final shovel of dirt on a grave, I rose and trudged to our bedroom. She followed but stopped in the hallway when she realized I didn't want her near me. That was the night I lost something I can never regain. I'd always prided myself on being the strong, silent type, someone who handled his own problems with measured calm. But in the face of a betrayal like that, calm felt like the cruelest joke. It wasn't newspapers that confirmed my darkest fears. It was the men at the site again. Only this time, the conversation was more direct. We were finishing a structural assessment for a new condominium project. The same two guys lounged in the corner of the break area, sipping coffee and chuckling over some inside joke. I lit a cigarette, trying to settle my nerves, and found myself next to them. "You see Roger's wife lately?" the first man said to the second, not noticing I was within earshot. "Turns out she's hooking up with that reporter, Vaughn. They showed up together at some fundraiser last night, laughing it up." I stiffened, my whole body rigid. The second man realized I was there. He went pale. "Ah, man, sorry." My voice came out gravelly, like ground glass. "What did you say?" The first guy raised his eyebrows, flicked his gaze between me and his friend. "I mean, that's the rumor. Didn't know if if it was open or something." Open? As if this was some casual arrangement. I couldn't speak. I exhaled cigarette smoke slowly, focusing on the swirl it made in the air. For a moment, I pictured pounding my fist into his face. Instead, I flicked the cigarette onto the ground and crushed it under my heel. "Don't," I muttered. "Just don't." The men went silent, shifting uncomfortably, as though they'd stumbled on the unspoken tragedy of a colleague. I left them there, that swirl of humiliation clinging to me like a rancid smell. By the time I made it home that night, Caroline was already there. She sat at the edge of our bed, eyes cast down, twisting a small ring on her finger. The ring I'd given her for our anniversary a year before. She looked up as I entered, parted her lips to speak, then closed them again. I set my suitcase by the door. My hands trembled. Finally, I forced the words out. "I know," I said quietly. "Stop lying. I know about you and Vaughn." She tried to hold my gaze. "Caleb, I don't." My voice caught, raw and cold. She dropped her stare back to the floor. I wanted to ask her how long, why, what was so lacking in me, but all of it lumped into a searing ball behind my rib cage, refusing to come out in coherent speech. She reached for me, but I stepped back. The air felt like it was closing in. "I'm leaving," I told her. "I'll pay for it all. The mortgage, your needs, everything. But you're free. So am I, because I can't live like this." Her lips quivered. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she stayed silent. If there was an apology in her mind, it never made it to her mouth. I saw her shoulders slump as though some heavy weight had been placed on them. I waited for her to fight, to beg, to confess. She did none of those things, just nodded once, a slight motion, and a tear slid down her cheek. That was all it took for the anger in me to erupt. I'd expected defiance, denial, something I could push against. Instead, she gave me silent acceptance, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. I turned and walked out, leaving the faint echo of her sobs behind me. That same night, I drove aimlessly, nowhere in mind. My phone buzzed a few times, Caroline's number. I refused to pick up. When I finally pulled over, it was in front of a random motel, neon sign buzzing in the darkness. The walls inside were thin, the bed lumpy. I sat on the edge, still wearing my jacket, heart pounding with every second that passed. Dullness crept in. The humiliation ate at me. I tried to find words for what I felt. Rage, heartbreak, betrayal. But all I kept coming back to was the sense that I was suffocating. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed images of Caroline's parted lips, the curve of her dress as Vaughn's hand slid under it. Each memory hammered at my pride, mocking me with how easily she'd given him what used to be mine. I barely dragged myself into work the next morning, a hollow shell. My crew didn't know what to say. They'd heard rumors. Word gets around fast on construction sites. Everyone avoided me, except for a quiet pat on the back or an awkward, "Need anything, boss?" The pity in their eyes made me grit my teeth. Around noon, my phone rang. Not Caroline this time, but her sister's name popped on the screen. Marianne Hollis. She was in town for some reason. We'd never been close, but I answered, forced politeness into my voice. "Caleb, I heard something happened," she said softly. "Where are you?" "Let's meet." I hesitated. Marianne was nearly identical to Caroline in appearance, a heart-shaped face, hazel eyes. The only difference was something intangible. She was calmer, less flamboyant. Something about her always felt more genuine. Right now, though, I wasn't sure I could handle seeing a near copy of my wife's face. But maybe some part of me needed it, a chance to speak words I couldn't say to Caroline. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near my site. She arrived before me, standing at a corner table. Same figure, same posture. But the moment I looked at her eyes, I sensed the difference. No forced smile, no veneer of charm for some philanthropic cause. Just quiet sorrow. I sat down. For a minute, neither of us spoke. She reached across the table, took my hand in hers. Instinctively, I jerked away, not wanting pity. She sighed. "Caleb, I'm sorry," she said. "Caroline and I. We talked a bit before this. She told me things you might not want to hear, but..." I cut her off. "Yeah, in your blood, right? This, betrayal. It flows like poison." My words were cruel, but I felt them anyway. She flinched, pain flickering across her face. Her hand dropped to her side. I knew about their family background, how their father remarried quickly after losing their mom, leaving them feeling adrift in different ways. But right now, I didn't care about her feelings. I was too immersed in my own. "Go ahead," I said. "Tell me what you came to say." She swallowed. "My sister is lost. She's chasing something, some thrill. She's been restless for months, maybe years. I don't think it's about you. It's about her own emptiness." I clenched my jaw. "Doesn't matter, does it?" She still did it. "And with that journalist, everyone's talking." Marianne nodded. "I know. She's in pieces, Caleb. I'm not defending what she did. Just, you should understand it's not because you failed." Her words hit a raw nerve. I exhaled harshly. "It sure as hell feels like I failed." Marianne reached again, touching my forearm gently. And I didn't pull away this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." I nodded, but the bitterness in my chest refused to ease. "I can't do this. Not anymore." She studied me for a moment, her eyes full of sympathy. Finally, she said, "Then don't. Leave. Start over. You deserve better, Caleb." It was so simple, too simple. Leave, start over, maybe. But I felt shackled to Caroline by memories of our better days. And yet the humiliation was a constant needle under my skin. I stood abruptly, scraping the chair on the tile floor. "I can't talk about this," I muttered. "Not with you." "Sorry." Marianne sighed. "You don't have to explain." Without another word, I walked out into the midday sun, letting it scorch my face. Over the next few days, Caroline's calls flooded my phone. Texts, voicemails, apologies that sounded half-formed, pleas for me to meet and talk. Messages that read, "It's not what you think," or "I need you to understand." And once, in a stumbling attempt at contrition, "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I listened to none of them, read them only to fuel my anger. By the third day, I got a call from the security guard at the front desk of my building site. He told me Caroline had stopped by, left a small box addressed to me. I went down to retrieve it. Inside, I found a pair of cufflinks I'd given her as a keepsake. Strange, maybe, but she used to wear men's accessories as a style statement. And a single white rose. A note. "If you let me in, I'll explain everything." I stared at the note until the letters blurred. Some small, fragile part of me still yearned to hear her out, to find some excuse that could rationalize her actions so I could breathe again. But I crumpled the rose and chucked it, along with the cufflinks, into a nearby trash bin. A guard gave me a pitying look. I ignored him. The day I finally confronted her in person was a windy afternoon. She texted me that she was coming to the house, no matter what. I'd moved out, staying in that motel, or sometimes sleeping in my truck. I hadn't planned to see her. But I decided, with a cold surge in my chest, that maybe the time had come to bury our love completely. I arrived at the townhouse first. Its familiar shape loomed like a shell of better days. The siding needed fresh paint in spots. The lawn was patchy. I parked out front, arms trembling on the wheel. Without any sense of hurry, I walked inside. The living room was just as I'd left it, furniture in a mild state of disarray. Our wedding photo was still on the side table, but now I saw it differently, as if it were some stranger's memory. 15 minutes later, she came in. Her face was pale, her hair messy as if she'd been running her hands through it. She clutched her purse, glancing around with uncertain eyes. "Caleb, Stop." My voice was quiet but firm. I exhaled slowly, turned to face her. "You said I wasn't your choice. You said that from the start. So what do you want?" Her eyes pooled with tears. Maybe I said that out of frustration. It's not that simple. I was angry at how distant we'd become. My work, your work, I felt invisible. Yet you managed to become visible to Vaughn, I said, letting the sarcasm drip. "He sees you, right? I'm just the guy paying the bills." She flinched. "I never planned on it getting this far. It was just, he excited me. He looked at me in ways you don't anymore. Or maybe I just stopped noticing. I don't know." The anger flared in me, but it was that cold, internal anger that feels like ice forming around your heart. "So that's it. I bored you." She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "No, it's not that. I swear I never meant to." She tried to step closer, but I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Enough." An oppressive silence filled the room. She tried to catch my gaze, but I stared past her, at a spot on the wall. Finally, she rummaged in her purse, pulled out a small cloth bag. She set it on the table, near our wedding photo. The contents clinked softly. "I brought these," she said. "Mementos. The ring you gave me when we got engaged, old letters you wrote. I want to give them back, if that's what you need to move on." I swallowed the lump in my throat. She was handing me back everything that once symbolized our bond. It felt like she was ripping open a wound I'd barely managed to seal. "I told you," I said in a voice barely above a whisper, "I'm paying for everything. I don't care about money. Take it. Leave it. Do what you want. But I can't breathe around you now." She let out a sob, a genuine, guttural sound that echoed in the silent house. I watched her tears fall, but the part of me that once would have comforted her was gone. I felt a pang, a flicker of pity maybe, but mostly numbness. She stepped forward again. This time, I didn't move away. She was close enough that I could smell her perfume, faint traces of vanilla, and something else. My heart pounded with conflicting desires, to hold her, to push her away, to run, to scream. But men don't cry, right? So I locked my jaw, forcing down everything. She stood there, searching my face. "Caleb, is there any chance? Can we fix this?" I let out a dry laugh. "Fix what?" "The marriage you shattered. The humiliation I feel every time I think of you with him." She sobbed again. I wondered if she was crying for me, or for herself. Maybe both. But I couldn't find the capacity to comfort her. "I'm sorry," she managed to say, her voice trembling. I love you, Caleb." I closed my eyes, remembering the nights she used to say that, meaning it. Remembering the day I discovered them together, his hand creeping up her thigh. Something in me snapped, or maybe it finally died. I opened my eyes, stared at her tear-streaked face. "I still love you," I admitted, feeling the weight of those words pierce me. "But I can't do this. I won't." There was a flicker of hope in her eyes, like a dying match in a dark tunnel. Then she saw the steel in my gaze, the finality. She realized I meant every word. "Okay," she whispered, voice barely audible. "If that's what you want." I took one long, shuddering breath, fighting the ache that threatened to choke me. "Go," I said, my tone hollow. "Or I will." She lingered for a heartbeat, as if expecting me to change my mind. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the mementos behind. Vengeance. The word swirled in my mind as I sank onto the old couch. I'd never been a vengeful person, but something in me demanded retribution. I felt humiliated, tarnished as a man, as if everything she and I built was a joke. I wanted to see Derek Vaughn suffer, if only for a moment. What I never admitted was that if I destroyed him, maybe I'd still be left with the same hollow misery. I had a choice: remain the silent victim or do something. I decided to act. It happened one afternoon when Vaughn's boss, a well-known editor, reached out to me through a mutual contact. He wanted information on a construction scandal Vaughn had been reporting. An interesting twist. Vaughn was about to publish a story on some unscrupulous developer, and the editor wanted an inside perspective. The old me would have complied. But now, with seething bitterness coiling in my gut, I saw an opportunity. I agreed to meet the editor, a wiry older man in a wrinkled suit, in a back booth of a diner. With the kind of understated malice I never thought I possessed, I lied my way through an interview, leaving just enough seeds of doubt about Vaughn's credibility. I didn't directly accuse him of anything, just dropped half-truths. Suggestions that he used unscrupulous tactics, blurred the lines between professional and personal sources. Nothing too specific, just enough to light a fuse. The editor listened intently, scribbling notes, his brow furrowed. A part of me felt slimy, betraying my own code of honesty. But the image of Vaughn's hand on Caroline's thigh kept flashing before my eyes, fueling my readiness to do harm. By the end, the editor thanked me, left the booth. I watched him go, feeling a cold satisfaction mixed with shame. In the next few days, rumors swirled in the local media circuit, stories about Vaughn's personal involvement with certain sources, unethical lines crossed for exclusive scoops. The man prided himself on moral superiority, but these rumors chipped away at that facade. His brand, built on trust, started to crack. I heard from a friend in the industry that Vaughn was on temporary leave while the station investigated. He was fuming, apparently promising to clear his name. That was my vengeance. A quiet, underhanded act of sabotage. And when I heard that Vaughn's big exposé was postponed indefinitely, I felt a cold jolt of triumph. Perhaps it was petty, but a petty victory is still a victory when your pride is at stake. I imagined Vaughn, storming around newsrooms, cursing the nameless informant who'd cost him his moment in the spotlight. But the satisfaction was short-lived. Because at the end of the day, Caroline was still gone, at least in any sense that mattered. The ring, the letters, the photos, pieces of a life that no longer existed. I might have wrecked Vaughn's progress for a moment, but it did nothing to heal the gaping wound inside me. The morning after Vaughn's temporary leave was announced, Caroline showed up at the motel, knocking on my door. I opened it a crack, still half asleep, wearing yesterday's clothes. The swirl of her vanilla-laced perfume reached me. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She tried to push the door open further. "What do you want?" I asked, blocking her. She frowned. "Let me in, please." I let her in, stepping aside reluctantly. She glanced around the cramped motel room. The wrinkled sheets, the stale smell of cigarettes, a flicker of sadness crossed her features. She turned to me, her voice wavering. "I think you did something to Vaughn. He's in trouble with his network. Rumors are spreading. Did you?" I met her gaze, silent. I gave no hint of guilt or denial. That was enough confirmation, apparently, because she dropped her eyes and let out a shaky breath. "You went after him," she whispered. "Why?" My jaw tightened. "He took something from me. I wanted to return the favor." She shook her head. "He didn't take me, Caleb. I let it happen. But this, it won't fix anything." I scoffed. "Spare me the moral lecture. You're worried about him now." She bit her lip. "I won't lie. I've seen him upset, frantic. I don't know. A mess." I slammed a fist lightly against the doorframe, frustration coursing through me. "Good." She flinched at the venom in my voice. A tense silence fell between us. Finally, she let out a trembling sigh. "I'm trying to piece together my life, you know. And yours. I'm lost. But if this is how you find closure," I repeated bitterly. "There's no closure. There's just emptiness now. And I have to learn to live with it." She nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "I know. I'm sorry." The apology lingered in the stale motel air, doing little to mend the broken pieces. I almost wanted to comfort her. An old habit, I suppose. But the memory of her betrayal was too strong. Finally, she left. No tears, no dramatic goodbyes. Just an unspoken acceptance that the gulf between us was too wide to bridge. I wish I could say the revenge made me feel stronger, but that'd be a lie. Days turned into weeks, and I drifted through them in a dull haze. My friend from the site, a foreman who'd known me for years, suggested I see a counselor or talk to someone. I refused. Men handle their own problems, I thought. So I kept going, focusing on building schedules and project deadlines, ignoring the hollowness that gnawed at me each night. Caroline continued with her philanthropic events, though from what I heard, she wasn't as radiant. Vaughn's name still popped up occasionally in local news, but his star had dimmed for the moment. My life had ground to a slow, numbing routine, a daily test of endurance. Then one evening, out of the blue, I got a text from Marianne. "Heard you're not doing well. Please talk to me." I almost ignored it, but something in me said I needed a lifeline. Some kind of human contact that wasn't about business or pity. Marianne wasn't my enemy, after all, just my wife's sister, caught in the crossfire. So I replied, "I'm fine. Just need space. Thanks. Meet me for coffee tomorrow." She texted back. I almost refused, but in the end, I said yes. Sometimes a man just doesn't want to face the darkness alone. We met at the same cafe as before. Marianne wore a simple blouse and jeans. She looked exhausted too, but she gave me a small, genuine smile. We got our drinks and sat in a corner. A quiet hush enveloped us, broken only by the sound of other patrons chatting and the hiss of the espresso machine. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly, stirring her latte. I shrugged. "I'm alive. That's about it." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "Caleb, I've never seen Caroline like this. It's as if she's caught between guilt and confusion." "Yeah." I felt a surge of anger. "I'm not her therapist." She lowered her gaze. "I know. But for what it's worth, I think she's truly remorseful." A part of me wanted to lash out. To snap that remorse doesn't fix betrayal. but I just rubbed my temple and exhaled. Doesn't change anything. Marianne studied me. No, I guess it doesn't. So what's next for you? I blinked. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I'll sell the townhouse, move closer to my brother, start over in a new city. I can't stand seeing reminders of her every corner I turn. Her eyes flickered with empathy. That might be good for you. A fresh start. Yeah, I muttered, feeling the weight of that decision. Part of me hated the idea of uprooting everything, but at the same time, it was suffocating to stay in this city where my humiliation was an open secret. After a moment, Marianne reached across the table, placed her hand on top of mine. I'm sorry for all of this. I really am. I met her gaze. She had Caroline's eyes, but none of the duplicity I'd started associating with them. Gently, I squeezed her hand back in gratitude. Thanks, I said, voice hoarse. The next day, I showed up at the townhouse with a clear intention: gather my remaining belongings. It felt like I was walking through a mausoleum. I kept expecting Caroline to emerge from around a corner, to do something or say something that would spark life back into the dusty halls. But the house was silent. I packed photos, old clothes, some tools from the garage. The place felt haunted by the ghost of us, by the illusions of a man who once believed in a perfect marriage. By mid-afternoon, I had everything I needed. I paused in front of the wedding photo, that same framed piece on the side table. My younger self beamed at the camera, an arm around Caroline's waist. Her smile was bright, genuine. She looked so happy. So did I. Without thinking, I smashed the frame against the table's corner. The glass shattered, scattering shards across the floor. I let out a breath that felt like it'd been lodged in my chest forever. Then I picked up the torn picture, stared at it for a second, and tucked it into a box with the rest of my things. She came home just as I was leaving, stepping through the door. Our eyes locked for a moment. Her gaze flicked to the pile of boxes, the broken frame on the table. A silent question passed over her face. I'm done, I said quietly. Moving out. For good. She didn't protest. She just looked at the broken frame, her lower lip trembling. Caleb, could you wait? For what? She hesitated. A final goodbye. I almost laughed. The phrase stung. But I set the box down, turned toward her. She gathered her thoughts, inhaled shakily. I've hurt you more than I can ever fix, she began. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know, what we had was real, at least for me. Maybe I was chasing something new and exciting. I was stupid and selfish. I threw away something precious. I know that now. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes, absorbing her words. They were the kind of words I'd craved for weeks. Yet they didn't bring comfort, only a weary sadness. Too late, I whispered. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I know. We stood there for a moment, the air thick with regret. Finally, I picked up my box and walked out. She made no move to stop me. That evening, I drove to a lakeside spot about an hour outside D.C., a place I used to go for fishing trips. As I parked near the water, the sun was setting in shades of orange and pink. I walked down to the shore, letting the breeze hit my face. The reflection of the sky shimmered on the water. I closed my eyes, felt the quiet around me. In that stillness, I pictured my father's face, stern, unyielding, telling me that men must handle their burdens with silence. The memory of his funeral came rushing back, the day I stood at the casket, refusing to shed a tear. Now, everything felt so similar. Another funeral, this time for my marriage, for the life I thought I had. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. Caroline again. Probably another apology, or maybe a plea. I powered it off, slid it into my jacket, because in that moment I realized continuing to speak to her only kept me shackled. I needed to face the pain and find a way out. So I stared at that sunset, listened to the rustle of leaves and distant sound of frogs. I reminded myself to breathe. The grief was heavy, but behind it, there was a tiny spark of something else. Relief, maybe. Freedom, certainly. Even the humiliation began to fade in that quiet place, replaced by a numb acceptance. I remembered how, in the worst nights of my father's sickness, I used to watch him struggle for air. I'd stand helpless beside his bed, feeling each ragged breath as if it were my own. Now, in a twisted sense, I recognized that same desperation in me. I'd been suffocating in betrayal, letting it define me. But I didn't want it to define me anymore. Maybe that's what real vengeance looks like. Moving on, healing, refusing to be destroyed by someone else's sins. 2 weeks later, I received word from a real estate agent that the townhouse had a decent market value. I put it up for sale. I heard from Marianne that Caroline was staying with a friend, that she'd taken a break from her philanthropic events. Vaughn's career was still on hold. I'd read a snippet online about an internal investigation at his network. My sabotage had stuck. Maybe in time, he'd bounce back. Or maybe not. I found I didn't care much anymore. I packed up the last of my things in a small rental truck. My plan was to drive south, near where my younger brother lived, find a short-term lease, see if I could get a position on a new construction project. A fresh start, like Marianne had suggested. Before I left, I stopped at the cemetery where my father was buried, on the outskirts of Cleveland. It was a detour, hours out of the way, but I felt compelled to stand at his grave one last time. I found it easily, the modest headstone, the faint lettering of his name. The wind was cold, stirring the leaves around my boots. I thought about how he never cried, never once showed me an example of what it meant to be vulnerable. Perhaps that's why I'd learned to hide my pain so well, and why I'd allowed my marriage to slip away unnoticed until it was too late. "Dad," I said softly, staring at his name etched in stone. "You told me never to cry. I'm trying." My voice trembled. "But it hurts. It hurts so damn bad." No response, just silence and the rustle of leaves. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Men don't cry, I reminded myself, but sometimes men break. I let out a ragged sigh, forcing the tears back. Even here, I wasn't ready to weep. I laid a small pebble on top of the headstone, a sign of respect I'd picked up from a friend who did the same for his family. Then I turned and walked away. The drive to my brother's place took half a day. Mile markers blurred past, each one taking me further from the city that had witnessed my greatest humiliation. I wasn't sure what I'd find in the days ahead. Maybe a job, maybe more lonely nights, but at least it wouldn't be the same script, replayed over and over. I never responded to Caroline's last messages, never took her calls. Sometimes I imagined she was somewhere with Vaughn or alone in our empty townhouse, rummaging through the rubble of our relationship. Perhaps she was crying. Perhaps she was numb. I didn't let myself dwell on it, because the truth was, I still loved her. And every time I thought of that, it felt like choking on broken glass. But I knew I had to move forward, or risk losing myself entirely. I found a small apartment near my brother's place. He helped me unload boxes, said nothing about my haggard face or the shadows under my eyes, just gave me a side hug and said, "You'll be okay, man." We grabbed some burgers, talked about mundane stuff. Football, the price of groceries, like we were trying to skirt around the landmine that was my marriage. I appreciated it. Later, alone in that new, near-empty apartment, I stared at the four walls, so different from the home Caroline and I had shared. This was a new blank slate, and it terrified me. But terror sometimes means possibility, I suppose. The possibility of surviving after heartbreak, of forging a new sense of self. Occasionally, I woke up in a sweat at 3 a.m., haunted by memories. I'd see her face in my dreams, remember the warmth of her laughter. Then I'd jolt upright, my chest tight, thinking of Vaughn's hand on her thigh, that lounge, that humiliating moment. My father's words, "Don't cry," circled in my head, like a ghostly chant. I'd bury my face in my hands, reminding myself to breathe, to keep going. I'd love to say I made a miraculous recovery, that I found a new love or soared in my career. Life rarely works that way. I spent weeks in gloom, throwing myself into small repair jobs, refurbishing an old deck for a neighbor, focusing on tasks that didn't let me think too hard. Money was tight, but I got by. In fleeting moments, I felt a glimmer of pride for refusing to crawl back to Caroline, for rejecting the easy lie that all could be forgiven. Sometimes, heartbreak is the only impetus we have to reclaim our dignity. And so I did, day by day, hammer by hammer, breath by ragged breath. One chilly morning, as I was about to head out to a job, I got a call. The number was unknown, but I recognized the area code. DC. For a moment, I tensed, thinking it might be Caroline. Curiosity won out, so I answered. "Hello, Caleb Rogers." The voice belonged to a woman. "My name is Janine Morgan. From a mid-sized contracting firm in DC, we have a large project starting soon. Multi-use development. We heard about your work, how you handled some complex jobs in the city." I exhaled, forcing calm. "Yes, that's me. We'd like to interview you. We need a project manager with experience. The pay is quite competitive. Relocation assistance possible if you return to DC. Are you interested?" I paused, ironically drawn back to the city I'd just fled. My heart pounded. Let me think. "Sure. If you can send your updated resume, we'll talk details." We exchanged contact info, and she hung up. I stood there by my cluttered kitchen counter, the phone in my hand, staring into space. It felt like life was offering me a test. Going back to DC meant confronting everything I'd left behind. Caroline, the memories, the rumor mill that might still whisper about the man whose wife betrayed him. But it also meant career growth, real money, a chance to establish stability. I wrestled with it for hours. Ultimately, I decided I wasn't ready. I emailed Janine with a polite explanation that I had other commitments, that maybe in the future I'd consider it. I didn't mention the real reason. She thanked me for my time, said the position would remain open for a couple of weeks. Just in case. That evening, I sat in a rickety chair on my small balcony, overlooking a quiet street. Lights in distant houses glowed, forming a patchwork of small, ordinary lives. I sipped a beer and thought of everything. My father, the vow that men don't cry, the moment I watched Caroline with Vaughn, the sabotage, the way I'd walked out. Anger had receded into a dull ache, replaced by resignation and a flicker of determination to survive. Would I ever truly forgive Caroline or myself? Possibly not. But that was okay. I was learning that not every wound has a perfect remedy. Some we simply carry. Over time, maybe the weight gets easier to bear. I thought about the townhouse, likely empty or in the process of being sold. About Caroline, who might be alone, regretting everything, or maybe trying to salvage a relationship with Vaughn. Strange how the woman I once adored beyond measure was now just a painful chapter of my life. A man should not cry, I reminded myself again. My eyes stayed dry. I watched the sky darken. The old me, silent and stoic, might have died when I found out about her betrayal. But now, standing in the ashes of that man, I was free to be someone else, someone who could rebuild a life. The humiliation and vengeance had taken their toll, but they'd also led me here, to a place where I could finally breathe on my own. And that, I realized, was enough. Enough to keep me from drowning in bitterness, enough to allow me the possibility of a new day, a new start, somewhere down the road. So I sat there, letting the night air fill my lungs. Maybe I'd return to DC eventually, or maybe I'd find opportunities in other states, other skylines. The future felt both terrifying and open. For the first time in a long while, I could feel my heart beating with cautious hope. I let out a slow breath and set my empty beer bottle aside. Then I went in and shut the door, leaving the stars and the regrets behind me for the night. Because in the end, all I wanted was to live, really live, without the suffocating weight of betrayal around my neck. I still loved her, but I could finally breathe.